Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Rogers Cup or National Bank Open final preview. Two players that I don't think, could be wrong, have to check everyone's brackets, but I don't think a lot of people thought these two players would be in the final. It's Hurkacz versus Pablo Carreno Busta. Hurkacz may be not as surprising as PCB, but it's going to be a very exciting final. It's been a really good tournament, I have to say. I think the quality has been good, and I'll very briefly touch upon the semi-finals that both played, but both players have played really, really well this whole week. Hurkacz beating the informed Kyrgios, who, yes, suffered a bit of stiffness, but he just seems to love these hard courts, does Hurkacz, in this time of the year. Similar to Medvedev, who, fell to Kyrgios earlier in the week. He loves this swing. He really does. The tournaments here in Canada, in Cincinnati, indoor Paris Masters, etc. Can Hurkacz replicate this at the US Open? Remains to be seen. That's a different question. But generally, he's so good on these courts, and it's great to see him back in some good form. For Pablo Carreno Busta, of course, a former US Open semi-finalist, he as well has found some good form and hasn't had the best of years, you would say. Hasn't won a title this year yet. Pablo Carreno Busta, it's his first opportunity. It's an opportunity for him to win a title here. I know he's been in finals earlier this year as well. Before we break it down and talk about both players and how tactically they might go about it and how we might see the match play out, I want to say two things. Please remember to hit that like button, please. If you haven't done so already, read us, help us out, and do subscribe if you're new. Thank you so much for tuning in as always. If you're a podcast listener or watcher as well, do leave a rating or review, especially on Apple Podcasts. Helps us out a great deal. Okay, the final in Montreal, the National Bank Open, Rogers Cup 2022, Hurkacz versus Pablo Carreno Busta. The head-to-head is 1-1. They have one win apiece. When was that? Well, both matches actually happened last year. The first was at Cincinnati, which is the next tournament, so that's next week. The next Masters tournament we're going to be covering. And PCB won that. 2 tiebreakers as well against Hurkacz, 7-6, 7-6. And that was a very, very tight match. And Hurkacz does tend to have quite a few tiebreakers. There's 2 reasons for that. And the first reason, I think, is because he's a fantastic server, has definitely one of the best serves on tour. And I talked about this in my Cincinnati draw preview. If you haven't checked it out, do check it out. I think that's where I mentioned the elite server club. And if we had to give top 5, I put Medvedev and Kyrgios in there. Isner and Opelka make up 4 out of the 5. I have to say Hurkacz is probably in there. He probably is. And not just his ability in terms of his serving ability, but also the ability to come to the net, and his serving and volleying capability is very impressive. Not just on the first serve, but second serve as well, and knowing how to figure out how the opponent is going to return. So that is something to look out for in this match. The second reason as to why he had a lot of tiebreakers is because he hasn't always been the best returner of serve. The forehand return especially has been a bit iffy at times, and he has struggled to be offensive on the forehand side and really hit through the ball. Technically, there doesn't look to be too much wrong with it, but it's more of a confidence issue. This week, it has looked better, so we may not see a tiebreaker. For Pablo Carreno Busta as well, similar thing. Pretty solid behind the first serve and good 1+ plays, especially with the forehand going in to win. Tries to be proactive on that shot, but also he's a very good returner. So when he does get broken, he is able to potentially get the break back. So, we've got 2 players with differing styles, and that normally makes for a very good final. Before we break it down tactically, and I've talked about it a little bit analysis-wise, I want to touch upon the semi-finals that both had. So Hurkacz, I talked about him beating Kyrgios earlier in the week, a very, very impressive win. But he played Casper Ruud in the semi-finals, the Norwegian. And I want to point out one thing first and foremost, because this is some really, really, really good tennis on display. And it's highlighted by the winners to unforced error account. 47 winners for Hurkacz to 89 unforced errors. Now, I get that a lot of those points are finished at the net. Doesn't matter. A winner is a winner. That's really clean. That is a really clean performance over 3 sets. So we're talking about 6 unforced errors per set. And then if my math is correct, sorry, I'm hoping it is, it's around 16 winners per set as well. So 16 winners and 5 unforced errors per set on average. Casper Ruud didn't do too badly himself. He hit 34 winners and 12 unforced errors. So it was a really, really high quality match. Great to see from both players. And I think both very friendly as well. The one thing that I think stands out as well from the serve statistics is that ace count for Hurkacz, 18 aces. That's very high, only 1 double fault, which is good. First serve percentage was a little low at 53%. If that first serve percentage was higher, we'd be seeing his ace count in the 20s, right? Definitely. First serve points won, though. We're talking about percentage-wise behind that first serve, 81%. Really, really high. Very impressive. Second serve points won, 43%. Now, the reason why it's 43% and not particularly higher is because in the first few sets, his second serve percentage, so we're talking about set 1, was 29% in set 1, 42% in set 2, and 64% in set 3. Now, why the difference in Hurkacz's second serve points won? And there is a simple answer to that. Hurkacz was going into body or into forehand at times on the second serve and realized, what am I doing? Why do that? Or if he was going to the backhand, he was happy to stay in neutral and then rally with Ruud from the back of the court. He realized, just like Nadal did in the French Open final, that the backhand of Ruud is not a massive, huge weakness, but it is still a weakness. It's something that you can exploit tactically. He went serve and volley, even on the second serve at times, with the kick serve out wide from the ad side, especially into the backhand of Ruud, came to the net and tried to finish off points like that. He is one of the best volleyers on tour, Hurkacz. I personally think he's really, really good at the net. And he has great touch and feel as well. He really does. We saw some fantastic backhand slice drop shots from the baseline from Hurkacz. And he did a similar thing against Kyrgios, did the same here against Ruud. And it's actually a drop shot, which I think is pretty underrated because maybe I just miss it, but I don't really hear many people talk about his drop shot, but it's really, really good. Really good. I wouldn't say it's the best in the world, but it's definitely up there, that's for sure. So we're talking about serve stats from Hurkacz. They're pretty impressive, especially on the first serve and second serve. As I said, he worked it out, maybe a little bit too late, but in the end worked it out. Ruud did end up standing up in his return position. The reason why, by the way, Hurkacz did serve volley is not just because, okay, Ruud's got a weaker backhand. It's because Ruud was standing so far back on the second serve return. You can only really creep in and serve volley if your returner is giving you enough time. And Ruud was giving him time in 2 different aspects. The first aspect was standing really far behind the baseline for a return, which meant, of course, that Hurkacz had more time to come into the net. 2, his backhand generally is pretty loopy, has a lot of air on it, not particularly flat, and it's more of a rallying stroke that goes deep into the court, but it's not hurtful. So again, that gives Hurkacz more time. The 2 factors. Ruud in the end did realize I need to step up in the court because he was getting punished on the second serve return points. But in the end, it was too late. He's already 2 breaks down off serve. Net points won. Now, interestingly, we talk about the match, and I said he's already got the net, but 21 out of 37 net points won, so only 57% for Hurkacz. So not as high as you'd maybe expect. Now, there's definitely some instances when he's probably come in at the wrong time or the approach hasn't been good enough, etc. But generally, I think he's pretty good generally at coming into the net. I think Ruud is just a good passer of a tennis ball. Not just that, he's good in and around the net as well in terms of little dinks, cross court, retrieving drop shots, etc. So that's why it ended up being such an interesting match and going to 3 sets. For Hurkacz, the one positive for me as well from the semi-final, and I mentioned it earlier, was the forehand. I do think that when the forehand is firing and he's looking comfortable hitting it, that is when he's at his best, because that means if that is firing, it means the rest of his game will fall into place. Everything else seems so much more natural to him. The serve, the volley, the backhand. If the forehand is something that he is confidently hitting, then he's in a very good mental headspace, and it normally means he's playing well. That's exactly what we've seen this week, which is good to see. Let's then touch upon Carreno Busta's semi-final quickly before we break down the final matchup. 6 aces for Carreno Busta in his semi-final, 62% of first serves in, 79% behind the first serve, and 50% behind the second serve. So all very solid stats. Winners to unforced errors, 43 winners to 34 unforced errors. But net points won. Now, this is really impressive from Carreno Busta because you don't really talk about him being much of a net player. But 35 times he came to the net, which is very high over 3 sets for someone like Carreno Busta for PCB. 25 out of the 35 points won, so 71%. So a really high percentage of points won. And he wanted to disrupt the rhythm of Dan Evans, who likes to come to the net as well and finish off points. He's a very good volleyer, Dan Evans. And PCB was willing to come forward and approach at the majority of the time. He did approach at the right instances, and that then gave him the opportunity to finish off the points at the net. And look, you don't have to be the best volleyer if your approach is good enough and it has the opponent in an uncomfortable position. It means that you'll get an easy volley, and I feel like that is what Carreno Busta did against Dan Evans, and he adjusted really well. I think Dan Evans playing some inspired tennis this week, to be honest with you, so shout out to him. Okay, let's talk about the matchup. Now, I didn't mention the second time they met, which was at Metz, by the way. Indoor hard. Hurkacz won. It was a final 7-6, 6-3. Hurkacz has won his last 5 finals. Pablo Carreno Busta has lost his last 3 finals. So, everything tends to kind of point towards Hurkacz winning this because of his ability in finals, for one, and also his ability, I think generally just his ability on the hard courts and his willingness to come forward, and who he's beaten this week as well is probably more impressive than Pablo Carreno Busta. But that could also mean that mentally and physically it might have taken more from him. You never know. So how can this match be won and lost? Well, I think if Hurkacz serves how he did against Ruud, it's going to be a tough day's work for Pablo Carreno Busta and PCB. Hurkacz, as I said, seems to have different types of serves to lean upon and can ramp it up, hit his spots if he needs to, and sneak into the net at the best of times, which is fantastic to see. He's also been playing really well from the back of the court, and his shot tolerance, especially on the forehand side, has been impressive. Better than in the past, and better than what we've seen, I think, for a lot of this year. For PCB, also someone who likes it from the baseline and has pretty good shot tolerance. We could end up seeing some longer rallies, but I think for Hurkacz, he'll always be looking to sneak into the net when he can. If it's a good enough ground stroke, he will come in and try and finish off the point. Now, the question will be, can the PCB continually hit with enough depth to keep Hurkacz at bay? And I'm not quite sure, because especially in the backhand to backhand exchanges, Hurkacz has the better backhand in my opinion, and he's quite flat on that side as well, can rush the opponent. And I feel that he might get shorter balls then, and that's when he either hits a slice approach or approach into the corner, comes to the net, sneaks in. And then it's really up to, well, can Pablo Carreno Busta or PCB hit a ridiculously good passing shot? And he may here and there, but majority of the time he's not going to be able to, because it's just a very low percentage shot, especially on the stretch with Hurkacz on the net, to try and kind of curl the ball around him or a ridiculously difficult angle. So that's a positive for Hurkacz. For Pablo Carreno Busta, though, the thing that I think he will be happy about is his ability to move around the court, how he's been looking physically. As I said, I don't think he has as much wear and tear generally this week than Hurkacz, and that could mean that he might be confident in outlasting Hurkacz from the back of the court. It also might mean in the return points, he's looking pretty comfortable. Now, he won't do what Ruud did. He will adjust quicker to Hurkacz's serve and volley. If he adjusts his return position early on, then it gives Hurkacz something to think about. Because I don't think PCB will mind taking the ball on the rise. He will have to deal with a big kick serve for the second serve. He'll have to contend with that. I guess we'll see how PCB gets on with that. But generally, he is pretty solid. And the forehand was looking relatively big against Dan Evans. And he'll need it to look relatively big against Hurkacz as well. Because in the forehand exchanges, he should be having some success against Hurkacz. Despite Hurkacz, as I said, solidifying that forehand and looking to be more aggressive and flattening it out at times in the semi-final and also this week, you expect PCB to have better shot tolerance on that side still. So that's where he might look to go towards rather than going into the Hurkacz backhand, which I think is very, very solid and not really a side that you might want to go into continually because it is very, very repeatable for Hurkacz. The other question mark is going to be how does PCB counteract the serve volley? And of course, standing up in return position will be a big help, but there's no point doing that if you're not able to get the ball back, especially on the first return, on the first serve return even. So what he's going to have to do is try and make Hurkacz think twice about coming in. Now, that could mean a couple of things. The first thing could be hitting the return hard down and flat and low over the net down the middle of the court. So if Hurkacz does come to the net, it's either going to be straight at him or at his feet, and it's a very, very difficult volley then. Or he just needs to hit flat generally with the return on the first serve. The issue with that is that, of course, it's a low percentage return. So he then might look to say, okay, well, I hit a higher percentage return, but in terms of coverage over the net, but lower percentage of return in regards to the angle that I go for. And that might mean, for example, if Hurkacz goes out wide on the due side, Pablo Carreno Busta tries to go down the line. Now, that's not ideal, but if he gives himself enough margin for error, he should be okay, right, going down the line. Now, Hurkacz is not going to come in every single point. He's not Maxime Cressy, but he will look to do so on a lot of the points. And the issue as well that PCB is going to have is that he'll probably serve into the backhand when he approaches. Can PCB's backhand hold up? And I'm not so sure about that. That's the big question mark for me. I guess we'll see, but I don't quite see how PCB wins this. I think the only way that PCB wins this one is if Hurkacz and his level drops in this final from what we've seen this week. And if it drops, then PCB is more than good enough to take the spoils. But considering their finals record, considering how Hurkacz has been playing, and also the matchup stylistically, I would expect Hurkacz to come through this. But we may see a couple of tiebreakers, for example, if Hurkacz doesn't return well enough, and then it will be a question of who just manages the tiebreaker better. But my prediction is going to be Hurkacz in 2 sets, actually. I think he's going to do it in straight sets. It could easily be 3 sets, though. Hurkacz's level is known to peak and trough at times, even in a match. But for me, Hurkacz should have too much. I think he's found some inspired form, and that's been really good to see. For PCB, great to see him going deep again in a tournament. That's my prediction. Let me know what you guys think as well. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think anything tactically needs to be highlighted in this matchup as well? And if so, let me know in the comment section. Thanks so much, guys. Stay safe and well, and we'll see you on the next video.